Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast. Greetings, this is Hugh Ballou. We're back for another episode of the Nonprofit Exchange, and we've got yet another very interesting session today. It's a very interesting session with a dear friend who actually lives near me. And I lived here for a while before I met him, and then we didn't talk for a while. Now we've been talking frequently. And the more we talk, the more I learn about the global impact of Legacy International and the vision and passion for J E Rash on bringing this kind of work to the world that's so needed, and probably more needed now than ever before in history. So the purpose of these interviews is to hear from people that have done important things, to share their experience, maybe things they've done well, maybe things they didn't do well, and
You're frozen.
our work together. And we're experiencing a little bit of internet issues here today. We will do the best we can. And so if you can hear me, J E Rash coming in from Bedford, Virginia. Tell
Yes.
people who are you and a little bit about what you do. Just a little summary, please.
Well, I don't want to give too much information, obviously, because that would be really condemning of my character and personality. But pulling the wool over people's eyes, I feel that for the last 50 years. Oh, and I always tell people, please don't do math when I'm speaking, because it discloses too much information. But over the last 50 years, starting with schools and education, and building out of that another nonprofit organization called Legacy International. What we have developed over these decades is an ever deepening commitment to affirming, exemplifying, trying to affirm and exemplify in our lives. I guess you would call it my passion. Usually you ask that question, and I think the passion is that we see and that we affirm and we exemplify in our life and our work enterprise diversity and unity. And what I mean by that is that we see the common values that unify us and respect the diverse perspectives and others' experiences, respecting the other that is so much a subject of the world today. And so we try to live by a motto, which is to help me to help myself and others. And we do that around the world. Our mission at Legacy International, which actually is an organization that grew out of a summer camp here in Bedford in the late 1970s, early 1980s, which due to my traveling around the world and spending so much time in other nations and seeing the successes and the plights of people around the world. And I realized that our country was really an island, or our continent was really an island between two vast oceans. And even though we called ourselves a melting pot, I really saw ourselves as a tossed salad, and that people were not really mixing together, and enough. And so we started to bring young people from different countries to the United States, and then another nonprofit developed, which was a secular nonprofit called Legacy International. And as we've developed over the years, what we try to do is equip emerging leaders to transform their values and their vision into sustainable successes. And we do that in a number of ways. Much of our funding, which is probably a question someone's going to ask me later on, it comes from United States Department of State and philanthropies and individuals. We do a lot of work for the Department of State Education and Cultural Affairs, which means we do exchanges, we do trainings, leadership and development trainings. We work in STEM for young women, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. We have a new area of work which we call Global Transformation Corps. And that's where we take entrepreneurs and social innovators and we give them training. So the idea is to increase capacity of non-governmental organizations also, and to help others to do cross-sectoral collaboration and to construct opportunities for the next generation. And that's basically what we try to do in many different venues.
Well, and you have four different nonprofits you founded over 40 years ago, and we're focusing on Legacy International, and it's the URL is on the page at thenonprofitexchange.org, but it's Legacy INTL, abbreviated INTL, legacyintl.org, and it's quite an impressive site with a whole lot of moving parts. And I've been able to be on some of your video conferences, and it is truly a global experience. And so we are. Um, this is not religious work we do; it is philanthropic work. However, we are spiritual beings, and we come from different faiths, but we are aligned in common good. And what I've learned from our friend Bob Hopkins, who's listening on this podcast, is about philanthropy, the love of humankind, and how important that is that we show up with our gifts of time, talent, and money. And what we do in the NGO world is philanthropic in itself. So part of the leadership dynamic that I teach is that we all need to be philanthropists. If we're true leaders, we influence others, and we're giving leaders. Let me go to a little bit of specific stuff and let you share about. So um, you're all over the world, and I want to ask you where you had your best coffee. We'll save that for a private conversation. Um, we're aligned in our love for coffee, but he has much more varieties of coffees from different parts of the world and different ways of brewing them. And I'm kind of stuck on my espresso, but and my different kinds. But we share a passion for the tastes of that, and we support the. I do. I'm sure you do. The local farmers that grow it and make a living and sell it on the free market. But we interface with people in amazing ways. I was on a call with somebody from Singapore early this morning, late her time, and she had just gotten off a group call with India, and they're doing collaborations with nonprofits and business leaders. And so the world is smaller in many ways, but in some ways we're isolated more. So why don't you talk about why international work is important in this globalized society that we have?
Well, I think, the old statement of acting locally is acting globally. And I think that also acting globally is acting locally because we are sharing the same issues. I mean, COVID is a perfect example of a borderless, invisible force that binds people together or demands that we accept certain principles and basis for our coexistence. Over the years, we've seen the development of a consciousness of cross-cultural and intercultural relationships. Certainly economically and financially, we know how bound together we are. And so when we have the opportunity to envision a future, I think it's behooves us to look at the young people who are coming up. We try to work intergenerationally. We work with a lot of young entrepreneurs, young innovators, young social innovators, young educators, and so international work is, we live in a globalized world, and whether a person philosophically thinks that globalization is good or bad, the truth is, when you look at distribution networks, when you look at international finance, when you look at all the elements that make our lives the way we like them, look at the carpet behind me, was woven in Turkey, for example. I can see it in the video. That even the things that we just enjoy are globalized. So, to me, the way we bind those people together in terms of common is through common values of compassion and patience and love and a sense of justice and moral and ethical principles that unite us. And I've never spoken to a group of people, no matter where they are in the world, where I can't talk about those values and elicit from them the common response. So to me, everything we do for the future has to be in, with a sense of unity and or community. I mean, come to unity. Our own word in English expresses it beautifully. Or as our founders in our country talked about, the common weal, the common well-being. And if those are spiritual principles that go over borders of religious names and systems. And I find that our success, we're a nonprofit. We've been in existence for 40 years at Legacy International. So survival is an issue. We have survived in a world where nonprofits have a lot of difficulty. And I think we've survived because we respect others and they respect us. And we operate under the same light. We operate under the same historical basis, whether you call it in religious terms or secular terms.
Well, from my standpoint, there's no sacred or secular if you believe in a creator, and a creator created everything. And so I've enjoyed our conversations over the years, and we are more aligned. Yeah, I come from a Christian perspective, and you come from another one, and it's very different. But we're very much aligned in some of the basic values. And what you're talking about is people having conversations, and for many reasons, not just because of the pandemic, not just because of politics, not just because of religious differences. We have grown apart. We have lost the art of meaningful dialogue with one another. And we get so busy. And I served megachurches for so many years. And people get so busy doing the work of the church, they forget about serving God. And it sounds like it's counterproductive, but it is. And so we get so busy doing the work of our charity, we work in it a lot. We don't work on it enough. And so part of what I want to explore with you is you have been the visionary for 4 different, we call them nonprofits, non-governmental, we call it a charity. I like to reframe it all under either a social benefit organization, or instead of a for-profit organization, it's a for-purpose organization. You know, it's more energizing than to talk about what it's not. And really, nonprofit is a lie anyway. So we call it that because people understand that it's the tax exempt channel. But what are some of I noticed on some of the Zoom calls that you've invited me, and you've had presenters from all over, and everybody in the call has a sparkle in their eye and a passion, and they're leaning in to learn and to share. Do you find that? You said you've traveled a lot. Now you're probably traveling more on virtually. So when you're in different countries and different kinds of groups, what are the basic challenges, and what are some of the common perspectives, and how we can approach those challenges globally?
Well, of course, it depends on what the group is, but I think generally we can connect. I keep going back to what I call universal values. We build common ground based on those values, first of all. Second of all, we try to inspire vision and a sense of hope in people, which is a natural inclination. Then, what we're trying also, what we've been able to accomplish is to create learning communities with our participants and our staff and our alumni. So, and to increase skills and new perspectives. But what is it based on? I do an exercise. I'll share an exercise. You can all steal this exercise if you like. You're welcome to it. It's an exercise that I think makes a point very early. Within 15 minutes of me meeting a group, let's say from 5 or 12 different countries, who we brought to the United States, they're sitting in Washington in a conference room, and they've met me for the first time. Okay, they heard my bio, and yes, of course, all these impressive things, but I'm just like everybody else. I'm just a common person who, because of my dyslexia and my ADHD, I had to compensate. So I've done too many things instead of one thing. But I do this exercise where in the middle of a talk, I pretend to trip. And everybody gasps, and some of them get up and they try to help me. And I stand up and I said, what just happened? And they realize that I didn't really trip. And I say, look, did you care? Were you concerned about me? Yes, why? I say, you don't even know me. You've known me for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Why do you care? Why is it not this old man just tripped and fell? Ha ha ha. And they say, well, no, no, no. I mean, and I say to them, look, we're all hardwired for compassion. We're hardwired for love. We're hardwired. We're hardwired for understanding. And this is where we meet. So whatever the issues that people are dealing with, which are usually financing their projects, of course. I give an example also that if you're in Silicon Valley and you fail on Tuesday, on Thursday, you're having a meeting with another investment banker or another impact investor or angel investor. But if you're in Algeria and you fail, that's it, or Tunisia or Palestine. And so where it's really important to me that we share right off the get-go that everybody has a vision and they want a better world. And it's based on their culture or their values, because you mentioned culture. And believe in your ability to make a difference. That's really important, to believe in your own ability to make a difference, which I've seen that you talk about a lot, and also your guests talk about. And then to think about change is people intensive. You have to build strong relationships with people. And that means you have to learn how to listen and to appreciate what they bring to the table. And then again, that the common need is that every human being has a capacity to contribute something. So we talk about that. And then to be committed and to be patient with one another and to find the courage inside yourself. So no matter what the problem is, it's a financial problem, it's an educational problem, public health issues that we work in around the world, women's empowerment or lack thereof of empowerment, these basic principles of what we work with, to bring them out as soon as possible in a meeting so people can feel not only hope, but then we can talk about, here are the steps to build a strong organization. Here are the steps to look at for funding. Here are the people who you need to meet. Here are the type of networks you need to be in. That's how we look at it, and that's how I deal with it. So the specific problems, they differ across different countries in different areas. I mean, for example, we were the first organization to bring youth from Palestine and Israel together in the United States. We know the history of that. So, I don't know if that's answering your question directly, but instead of labeling what the issues are, I think we have to look at, as you said, let's look at the positive. Where do we meet each other?
Well, and a famous quote from Henry Ford was, obstacles are what you see when you take your eyes off of your goal. And
exactly.
So I had a client years ago that I met at a conference, a music directors conference. And they said, oh, we do these global events. And they were a German company. And nobody in America will talk to us because they never heard of us. And I said, well, yeah, because Americans don't know what happens outside of our borders. So they engaged me to help them bring an event to America, which they've been doing for 20 years. So I actually made contacts. We did some site visits, and we actually had the event in 2012 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And what it was it's a music event, but it was like Olympics, because they couldn't call it that, Olympics for choirs. And so for me, I grew up a Southerner. Now, if I categorize myself as a WASP, W-A-S-P, let me give you what that means. Wise Alex Southern Presbyterian. So you thought I meant something else, didn't you? So I grew up in a very unique culture in a Southern church, and everybody looked like me. And so going to an event where there's 100 countries represented and they're all singing differently, but they're judged by some common artistic standards, which are universal. But what happened in that event, 10 days event, and it brought, huge amounts of people together. And what happened was world peace descended upon an event that was a musical competition event. And
Exactly.
People that were competing each other were cheering. So the brilliance of that is we celebrated excellence in music. And I got to tell you, I was going to be a musicologist. I studied all styles of music. I studied lots of performance art. I studied lots of literature. I heard music I never dreamed existed in the classical genres. And then when we went to the folk genres of all the countries, it just blew my mind. And so the wealth of experience outside of our borders is just phenomenal, just in that one area. So imagine, and we've talked about music. Imagine if you take any subject, like the subjects you work on. And I'm looking at your website here, and I see programs, economic empowerment, global youth programs, peace dialogue, social entrepreneurs, professional fellows program, youth leadership programs, emerging young leaders. You just have so many opportunities of engagement in so many different places. So you have a lot of people
Well,
working together and on common ground. So what do you see helps
I
people?
just want to can I continue. Your metaphor.
Sorry, we got a technical glitch here. Are you frozen? I think we have a little internet snafu, and he's coming back in. So we have
Okay.
the internet's not
Yeah,
our
we're
friend
having
today.
this problem.
So
I
my
want to extend your metaphor if I can. Because your question is your metaphor that you use about the orchestra is really, 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 really important. It's one I've used in my life too, because my mother was a classical pianist, and you are so right on target with this. People don't realize when they go to a symphonic performance and they don't realize that when they hear everybody tuning up, that's part of the performance. They wait for the piece to start, but they don't realize that 5 or 10 minutes of tuning up with the first violinist is part of the performance. And what we're doing is all the work we do is try to attune people to one another. The second they don't tend to realize, I believe, is that everyone there is an expert who is volunteering. Oh, yes, they're being paid, but they're sharing their expertise. Every person sitting on that stage is an expert. They're sharing their expertise. They could be a soloist, and they may very well be in part of their life or part of a quartet, but they are an expert. And so they're merging their expertise, not in competition, but in collaboration. And the third thing they don't realize is that the person standing in front of them has vast knowledge and has the sense of what comes when, as long as they do, the conductor. But the conductor is a mentor and a coach, both. Is a mentor and a coach. Not the same thing. And the mentor is playing an instrument too. It just is a silent instrument. So I love that analogy that you use. Probably because I've also used some of it myself over the years. This is really, really a critical issue to understand how people can work together, how they apply what they already know. And we have to learn to listen. We have to learn to listen. The other side of it is the question is, how do we get people and I'm going to be very transactional for a moment, how can we get people who can fund these things? And this is where Bob comes in his work. How do we get the people who can fund these things to really understand the concept that it's not a top-down funding thing, but it's a collaborative issue, that they're part of the orchestra too. And they're subscribing so that orchestra can exist.
You could teach my keynotes. You could present my keynotes. You got that down pat. So the flip here.
You pay for
that. the pivot here is to go from people who are not conductors, think a conductor is a dictator. But I got to tell you, you got union musicians sitting there, and you contracted for a 2 or 3 hour gig, they call it. They're going to leave after that time. And whether they've played all the notes or whether they've done a good job or not, they're leaving. And so it's our job. We can't be a dictator. Just because we got this little white stick doesn't mean we can make anybody do anything. What we can do is influence people. So it's the power of influence for those of us who are visionary, for those of us who are leaders in today's world. So, I want to talk about the trajectory we see for the future, but we've mentioned some of these characters a couple of times. So would you be interested in letting them ask a couple of questions at this point?
Yeah, Yeah, sure. If I just want to outline three tools maybe that I think that are important, if you don't mind, which is
Sure.
individual action. That's how you set an example for others. And that example can be a bad example or a good example. As long as we know how to say, I'm sorry, that wasn't the best suggestion. Thank you for correcting me. That's an example also. The second thing is organizing, coordinating the action with others, creating and influencing policy and procedures. And the third thing that I think is really important is learn to speak out. Use the media like you're using it, like we use it right now, or using it right now. Tell the story, spread the word, and make people feel empathetic, but also feel that they belong to a larger whole. So what does that take? It takes a willingness to meet each other. It takes something else, the willingness to tell the truth, and the willingness to listen, and the willingness to acknowledge harm, and willingness to restore goodness to this world. So if there's harm done, we have to remediate it, and so make sure it never happens again. And this takes us to this where the world we're living in, I think. But sure, I'm welcome to answer questions or to ask questions to other
Well, just
people.
before we do that, I think there's a piece of that Brene Brown talks about, and James Jordan, who writes for musical conductors, choral conductors, about vulnerability. We think we've been taught, and common practice says that leaders always have all the right answers, which is wrong. Leaders have good questions, and
Yeah.
maybe no answers, but you surround yourself with competent people that have the right answers. And you mentioned in that analogy about listening skills. That is probably the most underutilized leadership skill that I've experienced. What do you think?
Uh, yeah, well, it's taken me a long time to learn how to listen, which you can tell because I like to talk. But really, and that comes from my own spiritual path. You know, I spent 14 years in and out of India. I lived along the Ganges River. I lived in ashrams, and then I met my teacher in India, and took that a path of Sufism, and became a teacher myself. By the one error my teacher ever made was to assign me to teach. But other than that, maybe he saw something in me that I never saw. But this listening is really, listening is not just listening to other people. Listening is listening to nature. Listening to nature doesn't necessarily mean that we're hearing sounds. We're listening to a presence, which I would call a divine presence, but other people may call it something else. It doesn't matter what they call. But learning to be peaceful. So I call it sort of kind of Sufic mindfulness or mindfulness, which is listening to your breath, taking 40 seconds out of every hour and just close your eyes, breathe, be present. And if you want to say the name of God, or you want to say, make a prayer, or whatever you do in your tradition, take those 40 seconds out and stop. Learn how to stop. Because when you're stopping, you're listening. And I think that's so important. Then we can listen to people's words and their ideas, and we can filter them through our own experiences, which we have to do. But there are a few people you can really dialogue with. And I think that's what you're trying to build. You're trying to build a cadre of people that can dialogue.
Yes, we had a leadership cohort on a call earlier today. I have a leadership community for nonprofit leaders improving their skills, and there's some really good stories on there. People are helping each other. So we had people all over the country who didn't know each other before today, who were offering to help each other out. To your that's embedded in our human spirit that we want to be helpful. And I do find that as I get older, people are more helpful. Let me help you, sir, when you when we trip up. So I'm going to let's pause here, man. I want to talk to you about some of the specific leadership challenges, but we have some folks on here, and if you're ready to entertain a couple of outsider questions, Jeffrey, Ira, Bob. I think since we've talked about Bob, we ought to let Bob talk. We have this masterful book. Philanthropy Misunderstood, which if you don't have this book, it's philanthropymisunderstood.org. It is a must for every coffee table. If you're a leader anywhere, if you're a business leader, you need to be a philanthropist. So, Bob, you see you're on the line. You want to ask a question? Your mic is open. Go ahead. You're muted. I think. No, you're open. Bob, can you hear me? We are not hearing your mic. So, oops, now it's muted, but it says you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. Um, so you play with that a minute. Let's call on Ira. Do you have a question, Ira, or a comment? Ira lives in the same location that we're in and is connected with the University of Lynchburg here and many other places. Yep. Ira, welcome.
No, thank you very much.
Do you have a comment or question for Mr. Rash today?
Yeah, I would appreciate if Mr. Rash could discuss about how values could empower organizations instead of, some other elements in the way they promote themselves.
Good question.
Well, I think that most organizations would say they operate with values. Certainly you can think of large organizations like Sierra Club or something like that. But I think that it's the integrating of those values into articulating them and integrating them into every training that you do or every hire that you make and every product that you make. So certainly there are ways of doing that are obvious ways that some people use CSR, as you well know, and as you promote, Ira, and as we promote with GTC, Ira is also a co-founder of GTC, is that the corporate social values or the organizational values have to be out front. They're not behind the scenes. Say, by the way, this is how we use some of our profits, or by the way, these are the people we help. I think you have to lead with the concept of service and help. And for that, my experience, and I think yours are too, is that corporate leaders and non-governmental organizational leaders themselves have to go through some retraining, break down some of the silos, break down some of the issues that it's all about how much money we get or where are we going to get our next funding, and to really trust in the fact that what they believe in and what they're doing has power, has a force, an attractive force. And so there needs to be new leadership training, organizational development changes, looking at nonprofits or nonprofit organizations or NGOs like we are, in a way that the principles in those organizations truly articulate their commitment to their values. It's soft skills, but they're very important. A soft skill development right now in the world, I think, is really critical. There are 5 points to success and 23 ways of dealing with entrepreneurship and all of that. That's great, but nobody's going to follow that unless you can digest it and it becomes part of your heart and your mind and your soul, and it's in your words. So this, I think this is really important.
Absolutely. Those are wise words. Those are so important. I see Bob has logged off and come back on. Bob, is your mic working now?
I don't know. Is it?
It is.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Oh, good. Well,
Hi,
thank
Bob.
you. Hi, how are you doing? I've got a picture here of some students that I worked with, so you don't mind not seeing my face, I assume.
It depends on what you look like today, but usually it's okay.
Good. Anyway, back to something you said earlier that rang a bell with me because I've been doing some studying and trying to find out, and you were talking about people who are givers and philanthropists and what drives them, et cetera, et cetera. And back to the question, do you think they're born?
Yes, I think they're born, but they're also created. I mean, that's a great question. I have a sort of a word game I play with the English language because we deal with different languages, but to live forgiving and not forgetting, and I think that if we accept the concept, whether it's Judeo-Christian Islamic concept or whether it's another story, but it's basically an Adamic story, the story of Adam, that we all come from the same source. And because of that, we've forgotten our roots. And I think that we are all from my philosophy, which doesn't, it certainly is not other people's philosophy, but the way I deal with it is I believe we're all born in goodness. I believe that that capability, that quality of goodness is within every human being, and the struggle of life is to find that goodness, materialize it. Don't just objectify it, but materialize it, and it will guide society in good ways. And I think this is where we've strayed in the world today. We're into a period of great forgetting, and I mean that in acquisitiveness, to get for me, to get, and I mean it in the way the word, what the normal meaning of the word is, definition of the word is, to forget. And we've forgotten our origins, we've forgotten the base of our life, and some of us who feel that this is really the way to move forward, I mean, we may be wrong. I've seen it proven over and over again that when people remember how they're unified, then their goodness comes out. And that comes out in the form of philanthropy. It comes out in the form of just personal service and volunteerism. So many places in the world, Bob, that we work in, people have no concept of volunteering. No concept at all. Part of it, of course, is because of their economic and social statuses, but part of it is because of the fact that their own traditions have not emphasized it, or they have de-emphasized it over centuries. But I definitely believe that we're born with a tendency, but it takes the environment and the company and the relationships of people to bring it out and to make it sustainable. So it's just like I planted a seed in my garden today. I planted a seed for next year in the garden today. I don't know what's going to affect that seed. It may grow, it may not grow, but the potential for that plant, the potential for that fruit is there. The environment's going to make it come out. So I think it's a combination of both, but I do believe we're born in goodness.
And so being able to focus that goodness on outcomes. We often talk a lot about nonprofit leaders, and we are in fact entrepreneurs. We're not working for General Motors, we're entrepreneurs. So we're social entrepreneurs working for the good of humankind. And we tend to be, because of that, we tend to be distracted by flashy objects, and we tend to not be disciplined. So what would you say, and you've created a global organization, and I imagine a whole lot of people participate with you either as volunteers or staff around the world. So let's talk about leadership. We're speaking to leaders who are saying, man, this is a lot of stuff. I'm tired. So you get a lot of stuff done, but you get a lot of stuff done by being very clear on what you're talking about outcomes, not output, not activity, but results. So you've focused on what we're going to do through our common values. So what's required of a leader who has a vision to make sure that it gets fully implemented?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because that same exercise that I told you about, the compassion one, mm-hmm. It comes out of a previous exercise where I have people list what common universal values are. And then the second question I asked them is, if you were going to be a leader, what would you add to this list? And what they add, because I'm interested in what they're going to add to it, the leader should be compassionate, they should be articulate, the leader should have a vision for the future, the leader should be able to feel, the leader should be able to have knowledge that others don't have, but also willing to listen, etc. So leadership it has to be a humbling experience. And to me, humility comes out of gratitude. And if you're not grateful for what you see and what you have, I don't believe there's going to be humility. So a good leader, to me, is someone who can articulate their vision in a way that others can join with it, can feel that they can share that vision. It's not my work, it's not my organization. For example, my organization, Legacy International, I'm not a top-down leader. We, first of all, since its inception, it's been 80 to 90% run by women. So that's interesting in and of itself. And second of all, we operate in a way where everyone has to have leadership responsibility, which means that everyone in the organization has to interface with our client or whoever it is we're serving. And because of that, except even in our financial office, and because of that, I feel that the inherent ability to realize the responsibility. What's responsibility? The ability to respond in the moment. The ability to respond to the needs of whoever it is you're talking to is a leadership quality. How do we train people to do that? Well, I think Ira's going to be on your program, on this program in October, and he's really a good expert in that. I might leave it to him to speak about a little about that.
Yeah, it's Ira Kaufman, who's going to be the guest on October 13th. We're speaking to you in 2020, if you're listening to this podcast in some other year. But we're talking about universal values and leadership principles that don't expire. And they're really, it's like Renaissance music, Mr. Rash. It's timeless. It's timeless. So you throw a call out to Ira Kaufman. Ira, you want to give a couple of minute preview of what you're going to talk about on October 13th while you're here? He opened the door for you.
Well, thank you very much. I would take that opportunity to share 5 years of work that I've been involved with a colleague in Croatia named Velimir Štrker, who's a specialist in innovation and leadership. And we wrote a book called Empower Us, which will be published around that first couple of weeks in October. And one of the things that we've done is we've looked at 4 values among the many different values that one would have from, one would consider from all the major world religions. They all have the attributes of a person, and how they and how important those values are as guideposts in their life. And we looked at 4 values from our, and we researched the values, and we linked them to performance in organizations and in leadership, and according to the trends that are happening in the world. And we still distilled those 4 values to trust, empathy, sustainability, and transparency. And then we correlated those values to performance and actions within organizations and society. And so we developed a model which is a little bit different than a traditional. Yeah.
If I could just say that when I think about the leadership, that is how we difficulty lies in how we translate these concepts in actual trainings. I'm sure you come across that in your training with people. And I think that one of the ways we deal with leadership is to expose people to leaders. So we've developed a cadre of subject matter mentors for organizations that are also training entrepreneurs or training for startups or training people to be nonprofit leaders, the narrative of other people. And I think that the other thing we do for leadership is when we expose them to people who are have actual responsibility with funds. For example, program, let's say $1 million program that's funded by the Department of State, that's run by our staff. We bring interns in, and we bring interns in, and we bring other people into it too, and then we expose them with experts like yourself or Bob or Jeffrey or others who have certain expertise, and they learn by absorption, by watching. To me, leadership training is not a didactic process. It's an affinitive process, a gathering, and we call it in our spiritual world a gathering, and you gather together. You gather the energy and you gather the knowledge, and you create an environment that's open, that's, how can I say it? Oh, I'll use Dr. Montessori's terms, an environment that's constructed for learning. So like we do in our school with our children. And then the third thing is leadership should begin to be taught at age 3, not some point where you become a leader of an organization. We give responsibility. We have a preschool. We have preschool at the World Community Education Center here in Bedford. We have preschool all the way through high school. And at every step along the way, children are given responsibility, whether it's the choice of the material they're working with, or whether it is a plan that they're developing or a project that they have. And you learn how to be a leader early on. And so I try to do my work from the youngest children to old people like myself, and trying to bring them together so everybody benefits from one another. That to me is leadership. And I guess the last thing I would say is, where do we need the leadership in the world today? We have to be honest. We have to be truly honest. I don't want to say politics aside, because there's no such thing. Everything's politicized. But we have to be honest. Where are the needs today? Who is suffering? Who is suffering? I mean, I was just on a pastors conference just before the Lynchburg Pastors Group. And I had no idea that there was a facility at Appomattox where 90% of the people who are held there by ICE have COVID-19. I had no idea. And I bet you didn't know that. And people are suffering within 30 miles of us. And I'm not going to say politics aside, because it's all political, but we have to somehow penetrate those veils and say, look, these are our brothers and our sisters and fellow human beings. And this is where leadership is necessary. True leadership, not political leadership.
Well, this is a call to action.
Sorry, I got a little impassioned today about that.
Preach it, brother, preach it. This is the call for those of us.
Can't hear you.
I can. I don't know if I'm blocked or you're blocked. One of us is blocked.
Hear you. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Am I back in?
Can anybody hear you?
I can hear everybody.
Yeah. I think it's on your internet.
Hold on.
I think there's two. There's two. Can you hear me now? There's two.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Somehow my volume went down. I'm very sorry. Could you hear me when I was speaking?
All right. So there's two essential books. Well, there's three actually for your nonprofit library. Philanthropy Misunderstood, and when it comes out, Empower Us. Ira Kaufman, who's going to be on the show in 2 weeks, and we can't tell you more about it because we'll spoil the surprise. And then the Transformational Leadership by Hugh Ballou, Moving Spirits, Building Lives, which has been on the bestseller list, and also my Transforming Power, which actually this book was #2 on Amazon for transformational leadership, which wasn't good enough, I was told. But anyway, so what books do you recommend, Mr. Guest, today? Let's talk a little more about leadership. We got about 10 minutes left, or 8 minutes left of our time slot. So share some more. Are there some good resources people could refer to? Now, you're opening up a paradigm of collegial, collaborative, cooperative work that's essential, and we need to lead the way as the non-governmental sector, right?
Yeah, I think we really do have to. We have to lead the way and share our stories and encourage others. I mean, I know I'm a broken record, but this is what I believe in, and we've lasted 41 years, and it works. So, I'm not going to apologize for saying the same thing over and over again too much. But as far as materials, I think one of the things I always suggest to people is read the thing that you don't think you really want, or read the things that you think you know about already. Read what other people are writing about what you think you're an expert in. And you always will learn something new. You'll always learn something new. And it's a humbling experience. And so I don't have a specific, I have things that I might read, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to other people. But look at your area of expertise that you think is your area of expertise. It probably is your area of expertise. And then read something that you wouldn't normally read because you think that, I already know that. As far as the future goes, you're in many groups And I don't mean to turn this around and make me the interviewer because you're the interviewer, but I'd really be interested to know how the groups that you're in, what are people talking about the future? Because to me, with all the bleakness in the future, we have to, there's a saying in the Middle East, if you know the end of the world is coming tomorrow, plant a tree today. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to plant a tree today. But I'm always interested to know what other people are thinking about this subject.
Well, I'm in lots of groups, and they're global, and they're quite varied with different people, and very few people look like me, which is probably a good thing. Um, but nobody, and I don't think there's been any incidents where anybody brings up politics or religion and anything that would separate us. People are fundamentally focusing on today what we can do to create and then tomorrow how are we preparing and moving in a transformative way till tomorrow. And these are just people doing their work, doing good stuff. And I continue to meet new people because I'm pretty out there on social media. And I've got a new group of people that have come in our community. We'll be opening up the community in the end of October for some more nonprofit leaders to come together and share together. I think the collaborative learning model is what I support the most, and it's what I get the most out of. And Ralph Vaughan Williams, you mentioned the culture of volunteerism. I premiered a Ralph Vaughan Williams piece in Ukraine in 1997, the
Uh,
Hodie, which is a Christmas story. And I went to every embassy and promoted it. We had the whole Israeli embassy there because we were partnering that with the Chichester Psalms of Bernstein in Hebrew. And they're fantastic musicians, but there's no culture of volunteerism since the communist times. And this was that 6th anniversary of that. So it's a very different situation, but I find that leaders are aligned on principle. Now, you ask in the prep notes for today, principles we share with social change makers. How do we, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Murray Bowen, a psychiatrist who wrote leadership concepts based on our knowledge of us from our family of origin. And he teaches to create guiding principles. How do we take these values and turn them into principles so that everybody understands how to apply those values? So it's another step to creating the culture. And you talk about the orchestra, that's a very clear culture of high performance. And so there's a clear protocol.
and he's paused again. Yo, can you hear us? You? Are you hearing you, or is it me is it mine?
I can hear you.
You can hear
Bob
me,
can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you. Yeah, I can't hear Hugh, but he's gone.
I guess, yeah, his internet. Well, I mean, I'll attempt to answer the question while we're waiting for him to come back, which is, and it's basically how I started today, which is that the principles that I think that are the basic principles are, Ari, you became the host all of a sudden, is to have a vision, is you back? To have a vision for a better world based on their values and to believe in the ability to make a difference. So you have to believe in what you're doing, and however you arrive at that belief. And to change is people intensive. So we have to build strong, caring relationships and sustain them. And I think that's based on the belief that every human being has a capacity to contribute something to life and to other human beings, and to be committed and to be patient. And then, of course, find the courage to realize that what you're working on may and probably will be still needed to be worked on long after you're gone. But you're contributing something to that process. And that's basically how the principles I think that we try to operate by it. to me, the real question is remembering the principles. You know, we can have lists of things and principles. So to me, it has to be integrated and digested, and it just has to come naturally of a human being, because who's going to follow? You're not going to follow a chart on a wall, no matter how many times you put it up there, or no, you're not going to have it pop up on your computer every 5 minutes and things like that. So are you?
No, but I'm a proponent. I'm really a proponent of some education, educating people about nonprofit management before they get into it,
Yeah,
because I think there are systems and there are accepted principles and practices in nonprofit management that everybody needs to have before they decide to open up a nonprofit and waste a lot of money and a lot of people's time.
Appreciate it. I'm back. They're working on the street outside. I think they cut my internet cable.
Oh my God. Anyway,
So how are
well,
you?
I agree with you, Bob. I know, Bob, you've been teaching on Bangladesh, a group on Bangladeshis and others, and I mean, if you have a list of those principles, I'd sure like to hear.
Right. Well, I'm loving doing it, and as I say, I think that if we could start with the children who are that age, and teach them the principles of giving and being a leader. Teachers and parents say, "What did you do to our children when we taught them how to be a philanthropist?"
Exactly.
And and then I realized when those questions came that we were onto something. And if it's changing children, then we need to teach it.
And I have met some of those children who now are young adults that Bob has influenced, and they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. So Bob, your work is a legacy that to build legacies and build in the future. So J E Rash, this has been a very stimulating conversation, and all of a sudden our time is up, and it's just amazing how fast. So I'm lucky that I recorded this on the cloud, so it continues to record after I got my wings clipped here. So in wrapping up today, what I'm going to give you the final word. You got about 2 minutes. What do you want to leave people with? What thought or challenge do you want to leave people with?
I guess it's. I think we need to reach out to each other and really be collaborative, and we need to create the means through which we can find the specific areas that we can work together and really work together. Really drill down and share our knowledge with one another. Those of us who are older, we're reaching into of course, the younger generation, as I said, in our school, but also with our legacy work. But I really value the knowledge of others, and I find that we get so involved in our own work that we don't spend enough time thinking about maybe one project we can do together, or we can aggregate some of that knowledge and work together. This is the conundrum that I find every day. I find when meeting interesting people every day, people doing wonderful work around the world, but where do we meet? Where does that glove fit? And I welcome any kind of ideas and suggestions for that. And the last thing I would like to leave people with is that God only knows what's going to happen, but keep doing the good work you're doing. Keep doing it, because unless we can't break the rhythm, if you break the rhythm, you ruin the musical piece. So we can't break this rhythm because change has to come.
Well, and Jeffrey Fulgham commented on the soft skills. We tend to overlook them, and when they don't work, they're not soft. You hit pretty hard. So J E Rash, Legacy International, it's legacyintl.org. You are truly an inspiration, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and some really great experience. And please go to his website and check it out. And so thank you for being the guest on this episode of the Nonprofit Exchange today. Thank you so much.